Hi friends, welcome to the Y on Earth Community's Stewardship and Sustainability podcast series. And today I'm so excited we have the opportunity to visit with Lila Sophia Tresemer. Hi Lila.
Hi Aaron.
How are you today?
I'm really great. I'm having a great day.
Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. The sun's shining and it's a beautiful, beautiful day. So Lila is a group facilitator, author, photographer, ceremonialist, minister, and co-founder of the Star House with her husband and partner, David Tresemer. Her primary dedication is to raising awareness and stewarding the geomythology of sacred sites. In 2000, Lila co-founded the Path of Ceremonial Arts at the Star House, which was a training for women in the path of priestess, one of the earliest in the field, and co-created the Women of Vision in Israel and Palestine. She creates programs for sacred living and remembrance primarily in Boulder and Australia. Lila and David have a healing retreat in Tasmania, Australia as well. She is a certified mediator with Mediators Beyond Borders and is dedicated to building a global community which honors the feminine and celebrates the sacred in all beings. Her current passion is weaving a living network for the lineage of Sophia, for men and women around the world who are seeking to reconnect with sacred earth activism and spiritual practices that matter in these astonishing times. She is a co-founder and a lead facilitator of Sacred Arts Practitioner Certification being held at the Star House beginning May of 2019. Lila has written and published several books, including Conscious Wedding Handbook with David Tresemer and Don't Go Back to Sleep, a spiritual novel, and Sophia Elements Meditations. Her DVDs include Brain Illumination, Couples Illumination, and Sophia Gnostic Creation Story. Now, I know there may be some words in here that aren't as familiar to some of us, and we'll be diving in and chatting about some of them. But before diving in, Lila, I want to thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing with us about the Sophia tradition, which of course is part of your name as well.
Yeah.
So I was thinking to kick things off, could you tell us a bit about the story of Sophia and what Sophia means?
I would love to tell the story of Sophia, and I think the entryway to that is the place we're sitting. So just to introduce people formally to our background, which is the Star House. And it was co-founded and built by my husband and other people in exactly 30 years ago. And then David and I got together 25 years ago and kind of built the community. And in a way, I feel like Sophia is the community that comes into form. And the form that we're sitting in right now is an extraordinary design of sacred geometry. The fact that there are no pillars in this rather large, expansive, empty space, which is 12-sided, each side dedicated to one of the constellations of the zodiac, hence the Star House part of it. But it's grounded in earth, and it's a realization that the communication between heaven and earth, or between spirit and matter through the human heart, that's also how I would define Sophia. So the word Sophia means wisdom in Greek.
It's where we get the word philosophy.
Philosophy, philosophia. David works a lot with the anthroposophic tradition, which is anthropos Sophia, meaning the wisdom of the human being. And Rudolf Steiner actually intended that word to represent the conversation between the feminine wisdom and humanity. And he knew over 100 years ago that that's where we were headed. And I just invite people to realize we're all connected to whatever you want to call the principle, whether it's sacred earth or great mother or Shakti, or in every tradition has some version of the sacred feminine. And if it doesn't seem to have that connection, almost always one can find it of a dear friend who's researched Judaism and really made a point of finding the feminine in Judaism. So, and there's been movements in Christianity as well as Islam to find where does the feminine reside. I personally feel that the planet in the middle of the screen here is one of the most important things we all have in common. And I refer to her, my word for the earth is Gaia Sophia, that it's all related to this feminine principle of nurturing life, being in connection with place, and sharing the resources of earth. Hopefully that sustainability is the outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm so struck that for many of us, we'll refer to this planet that we all share. We can sometimes think of it as a spaceship. We can sometimes think of it as a superorganism that we're part of. In so many of our traditions, we refer to Earth as feminine. Gaia, Mother Earth, and even Saint Francis of Assisi refers to Earth as sister. And it's a really beautiful and I think probably integral aspect to our human experience.
Right on. And I think it's something, my life has actually been dedicated to remembering, reconnecting to the feminine tradition through time, because I believe in my heart and soul that, and now I can say through my research, that there is a Western tradition of the sacred feminine.
Yes.
And that it intentionally had been, somewhat cut off.
Sure.
So that we don't, we have a little echo of Catholicism honoring Mary, and certainly the rich traditions of Hinduism, for instance, a lot of goddess energy that doesn't exist, well, it exists in their mythos, but it doesn't translate necessarily to the human dignity of honoring women in the culture. So there's a lot of disconnects around the planet of how we disregard and disconnect from not only our bodies, but from the body of the earth. So by going through our body, or by caring about nature, or by replanting forests, there's so many ways that we need to regain connection through direct communication and sacred activism.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little more about what geomythology means to you. And I know in the introduction that we mentioned that a big part of your dedication is to raising awareness and stewarding the geomythology of sacred sites, and this is one. Yeah. What does that mean?
I know, it's a phrase I landed on about 2 weeks ago, because I was having a lunch with a friend, a new friend in Australia, and she said, so, Lila, what is it that you do? And I just went completely blank. Like, it was like too big to put words on, and I didn't want to just start reading a bio, which is always like such an interesting snapshot. Who are you? Well, it's like I feel like so much more than that. So I went home. I said to David, I need to find that phrase. So I went, okay, I steward geomythological landscapes and sacred sites, starting with my body. Right? This temple, I have been stewarding it for 25 years, and it's not just the temple. It's a landscape that's surrounded by 12 standing stones that are, 6 feet high and 6 feet into the earth. So they're grounding energy. It's then about 100 acres around which are different sites. A labyrinth that is a site that can be found on the cave walls of Crete. In different locations in India and throughout Israel. This form is an old form. It's called a Cretan style Unicursal Labyrinth. That's one of the sites. There's dedications to the pattern that Venus makes 8 years in the sky when you watch it from Earth, which is a beautiful geometry. So it's a whole stewarding. There's a sacred well we call Mary's Well, and kind of the tradition of the Glastonbury Well have a connection with that. So the landscape for me has taught me so much. As we created it, it's informing us. Working a lot, why I love your work so much is because the fine-tuning of communication with the plant world is an essential aspect of what we have to reconnect with.
Yeah.
Why do the trees matter? What do we really need to understand about trees, about herbal medicines? You know, the big hoopla of plant medicines. Like every plant has a medicine.
Yeah, right.
How can we really, you know, we'll start creating more relationship with them in this upcoming sacred art practitioner training. What is your medicine that grows in this environment? And if you nurture that plant and then turn it into a tincture after the 9-month training, how would that be? You know, what plant medicine would that be for you? Would it be St. John's wort or dandelion? Or...
Beautiful. Oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting.
I love dandelions in particular. You know, and it strikes me too that herbal medicine is one of these aspects of our story, of our heritage, of our ongoing legacy as human beings that we could say has been sidelined at the very least over the last few centuries, in particular the last several centuries generally speaking. And it's so exciting to see herbal medicine on a rebound now. Of course, we had Brigitte Mars on the podcast several weeks back, as well as our friend Stephanie Seisen, who's growing biodynamic herbal medicines up at Sustainable Settings. And as we reconnect with these plants, with these medicines that are part of this creation here on this planet, it seems it will also necessarily result in enhanced health and well-being at the individual level. And it strikes me that as more and more of us reconnect with that reality, that we are going to discover keys to our own quality of life and health and well-being that we may have not enjoyed previously.
That's really beautifully said. I sometimes feel like, you know, there's two very clear paradigms that maybe cross over a little, though they're not completely separate, and that in each paradigm you could make the list. So, you know, earth medicine, plant medicines, and the pharmacological, allopathic way of dealing with health, which has its place and has developed important language and can overdrug and overprescribe and, you know, takes us out of the experience of relationship with our body and knowing. So I like to think I come from a medical family and had challenges with it from when I was quite young, because I'm not someone who takes medication. I would much rather find my way, right? And there's times when it saved my life. So it's a both and conversation, but to reintroduce relationship to plants. Yes. We eat them all the time, but what are we really eating? You know, really, what are we taking in with, you know, every bite of broccoli? Where did it come from? You know, is it laced in technological farming, or was it grown and loved? Because, you know, we both know that makes a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's such a beautiful aspect too of the legacy that we received from Rudolf Steiner, who gave his ag lectures something like 97 years ago. And he was able to make so many connections between our own bodies and the landscape. And I'm totally struck that, of course, all of these plants are growing out of soil, and soil is so fundamentally important to our lives as human beings. Our word human and the word humus are intimately linked. And I'm just curious what that is like for you, Lila, in terms of the work you're doing on this land with this sacred site and the tending that you're doing to this geomythological sanctuary. What is the relationship with the soil in particular like for you?
I love that question. It's not as predominant in my life as I want it to be, number one.
Yeah.
Some of the people we know in common, I am intending, you know, who are we call them earth angels on the property, who do grow biodynamic herbs that go down into town and become tinctures. And Rebecca's apothecary loves our herbs because they're biodynamic and wildcrafted. And I have a connection to that. And I want more time with my hands dirty.
Yes.
So I'm actually looking forward to nurturing that in this coming spring cycle. But on the other hand, as a kind of primary vision holder for a rather large project ×2, because we have one in Australia as well. It's related, right? So even the word earth has so many actives of meaning, right? As well as being, the actual humus, earth substance as it connects to water, air, and fire.
Yeah.
Starhouse ritual works a lot with the 4 elements, the way the kind of the cosmic clock or the geometries would be worked into winter, spring. We're sitting on the summer line, and autumn equinox. So to be in relationship with the earth is ultimately the dance of this beautiful planet in relationship to the sun and the moon. So looking at it, sometimes in my meditative practice, I'll go to kind of a Gnostic mythology, which means sort of direct knowing, but is also connected to the Nag Hammadi texts. And there's a tradition of Gnosticism. I tend to use it with a small g, meaning it's my direct knowing. But there is a tradition of a Sophia creation myth. Going back to your first question, what does Sophia mean to me? It is a cosmic principle. And in this working with the animation of what this cosmology might have looked like, I spent time with the animator looking at the Earth from the galactic core, which shows up in the myth telling and the creation story from Gnosticism. So when you imagine looking at the Earth through a field of, billions of stars and bodies, it's like, my sense is she still shows up as a shining potential seed. And there's something about Earth from a cosmic creation story that is so remarkably precious. So Earth is a planet, Earth is a substance, Earth, my body. They're all a resonance of some extraordinary gift of spirit and matter working together to create the precision of life on this planet and how finely tuned it is. Right? Like it's so finely tuned. Our atmosphere is so incredibly tiny and
really
precious,
is, yes.
right?
A thin layer.
A thin layer, and it's the thing that allows us to be able to, walk in the sun and, live, breathe.
Absolutely remarkable. Well, I will mention that many of our audience are growing in excitement around a very significant event that the Wine Earth community is curating and co-hosting right here at the Star House and on this property in May 17 to 19. And one of the things that we're doing with this 3-day event is bringing together a number of different experts and practitioners. One of the folks who will be joining us is a medical doctor trained in the Western allopathic tradition and also steeped in the anthroposophic tradition. And he's going to help walk many of us through connecting some of these dots that perhaps haven't yet been connected for us individually in terms of our own knowing, our own gnosis, our own knowledge. And I'm so thrilled and excited, Lila, that we have this opportunity to bring people together at a sacred sanctuary right here at the Star House. And among other things, we'll be talking economics, we'll be talking about leadership for executives and entrepreneurs, we'll be talking about educators truly activating those elements in their students that will help heal our world. And we're going to play in the soil. We're going to get our hands dirty. We're going to connect with some of the biophysical forces that animate our lives and make all of this possible. And just want to give a quick shout out that it is a whole lot of learning and training and practice over years and years that allows us to bring this together now. And I'm absolutely thrilled and honored, Lila, that we have the opportunity to do this in a couple months.
Yeah, well, this is what the property's meant to be, right? To be a template that provides mean, if you look at the space behind us, we think of it as a chalice. And that the name of the church itself, as a legal organization, is All Seasons Chalice. And the building is empty space, and then people come into it and fill it, right, with their content. And part of our job as stewards is to make sure that content is in resonance with an overarching intelligence, with the sacred intelligence that the property is dedicated to. And what I love about what you're saying, the work you do, the visions that we share in common, are that when these templates can be understood, we have an acronym for temple, because temple is also one of those words that's kind of charged. It can mean something that, well, that's my tradition doesn't do temple, my tradition does church, or I'm a pagan, I don't really like temples, I want to be in nature. It's like, all things work, but I like the acronym. Templates for embodied, mindful practice for living on earth.
I am writing that down.
Templates for embodied, mindful practices for living on earth.
Beautiful.
Change practice to patterns.
Ooh.
A mindful pattern, which is a little bit more energized than a practice, though practices are key as well.
Yeah, practices are active, aren't they?
But it's embodied and it's mindful and it's universal pattern. So everything that you do, I mean, Aaron and I had this fabulous crossing over moment when we do a lot of biodynamic stirs on the property, well, occasional, and we have done a few together. And then we did one that we then took to Washington, D.C.
Yes.
as a prep and on a sacred tour with people who worked in the Star House. We kind of practiced some understanding of how to hold sacred space in the four directions, how to be a vessel, as I would call it, of our higher self, or as the anthropocene of the divine that we are, to hold that presence and then bring offering, bring prayer, bring chanting, bring a song, bring one of the four elements to the National Mall in Washington, D.C., along with biodynamic preps, which we spread around to the trees. And we're going to be doing this as an annual workshop in Washington, D.C., because this embodied mindful pattern for living on earth is something that we all can magnify, along with much of what will come up in your 3-day event as well, that we can take these practices, weave them into what we're each here to do. So for me, the difference is between this is the way you do something, and here's a little bit of a smorgasbord of sacred items. Which ones are yours? Which tools are yours to work with? Rather than this is the practice of how you do this thing. And I'm really excited about that, because I feel our individuality right now is looking to find its place in connection to the mandala of the whole creation.
Yeah.
And that when I know that you know that and you're doing your thing and being your best, very best Aaron, and, representing what you do with Why on Earth, and, we start to then become a conscious community that can take a template, learn and synergize it, and then start replicating it as patterns and practices around on the earth.
Yes.
Not everybody needs a star house, but one can set up 12 stones in the 4 compass directions, use the template, if that template works for you, to do a little bit more focused and simplified ritual offering next time you're at the beach, or draw a labyrinth in the sand. We've done this quite a bit. We leave elaborate labyrinths that are quite large in the sand, and then we come back and see how many footprints have walked it.
Oh, beautiful!
Right?
Wow.
And you just maybe you leave a
that'd be
little
really
note.
fun to film.
Right, to have right, who finds it and what do they make of it? But just fun things like that. Like, how do we create the templates that are conscious and mindful?
Now, of course, the phrase elaborate labyrinths may be difficult to say 10 times fast, but I want to hang with that, because my gosh, what a beautiful offering you're placing maybe on a beach where random strangers may come by, people you may not actually interact with person to person, yet you're leaving them this gift that's an invitation to pause, slow down, and take a little more time, perhaps even a little more breathing, and to connect in with self, with surroundings, with spirit in a way that I know in many of our very busy days we can forget to. And what a cool gift to offer people. My gosh.
Yeah, it's really sweet. And drawing and making a labyrinth is a little mini workshop in itself.
Yes.
Because
yes.
it sort of, be great to show a pattern here, but most people have seen this labyrinth pattern that I'm talking about. It ends up looking a bit like a brain, and it's all very rounded, and it's called hebdomadic because it has 8 circles. But when you draw the whole thing, you start with angles. The whole thing starts with a cross and then angles. So it's a perfect dance between flow and form. And then you start connecting dots to lines, and pretty soon you end up with this whole walking pattern. So even the drawing of it is this fabulous balance between flow and form, masculine, feminine, straight lines and rounded expression. So I love that part of it, because to me, the dance in the creation is the sacred union between the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine. And that's what I feel Steiner, in his brilliance, was giving some really profound insights into growing community, growing children through the Waldorf training, remembering that there are nature forces that biodynamic practices feed.
Yes.
They need to be fed, and that's any one of those is a lifetime's work, right?
Yes, yes.
Waldorf education. But biodynamics is exciting to me because I feel like, the dynamic of bios, of the life, is something that we all need to know and remember we are engaging with all the time. Every breath we take, we're part of that bios. And in order to capture the possibility of sustaining it, we need to resacralize it.
Yeah.
We need to remember the sacred, that we are in the sacred geomythology of my body, of my land, of my community, of my planet. So I would love to see, little armies of big people, little people, all kinds of people, just kind of remembering how to do simple sacred practice that's authentic for whomever and whatever. We often will say to people coming into Star House, because we think of it as a trans-denominational temple, to bring what's sacred to you into the ceremony or into the event. Don't wait for us to provide that, because the mandala of the unfolding right now feels like I need to honor the allies I've worked with who teach me and who my mentors are, and to bring that, and not to feel like somebody has to agree with me, or so we've made this a traditional location for different expressions of sacred communities. Boulder's famous for that anyway. One of the only Western Buddhist universities in the world, and heavily practicing yoga community, and strong anthroposophic and Jewish renewal, and Sufi dances happen in Star House. So it's, Native American practice, pagan practice. So I love that weaving keeps happening, because I think it's going to be diversity, just like it is in the edge places of gardens and permaculture design, those edge places where we meet in our commonality and deep respect for each other's traditions and templates.
Well, I love the edge metaphor and reference that, of course, our dear friend who's passed, Bill Mollison, who founded permaculture, he's from the Australia area.
Same island.
Really, yeah. noticed that in ecosystems, when you have these edges where a forest meets a meadow, for example, you're going to have increased diversity, right? And it seems absolutely applicable to our social groups, organizations, and I am so grateful to be connected with a group called Green Faith that is doing incredible ecological and social stewardship and justice work all around the world, bringing together Muslims, Christians, Protestants and Catholics, and all manner of Christians, and Jews and pagans and Native American practitioners, and they like to say from A to Z, from agnostic to Zoroastrian. They really are doing as much work as they can in communities all over in a truly interfaith and trans-denominational way. And it's so cool to be hanging with groups of people who are very devoted and steeped in their own traditions, who are not saying, no, you're doing it differently and that's wrong. Instead are saying, wow, you have this beautiful thing in your tradition. I'd love to hear more about that. I'd love to understand how that might help me relate to some of these other folks in my community or with this work I'm doing over here. And I think for each of us to approach diversity with that openness, that curiosity, that sense of celebration is perhaps one of the layers of healing that we're invited to right now in these times when that kind of healing is obviously so important.
So important. I mean, in a culture where hate crimes are becoming, daily events. And Parliament of World Religions is doing their best as well to just keep a pulse going of, we respect and welcome traditions, and they're doing the same kind of forums. How do we keep pulsing tolerance and acceptance and communication, amongst all faiths, because that is partly where it has to come from. Right, the spiritual and religious leaders, and there's been good efforts made in that regard, and it obviously still a lot to be done.
A lot of work to do. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I would love to hear, I know that you all are launching SAP, which stands for Sacred Arts Program, and I love the acronym. Can you tell us, what is SAP? Why the acronym SAP?
Well, don't you love SAP? I mean, I just get so excited about it, and I don't even know anything about it. I mean, it's one of those things that's on my literal desktop to do more research about. But here's what I know about SAP.
I especially love it in the form of frankincense, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Right?
There
that's
you
a
go.
tree sap
That's
that
a tree
we
sap.
burn as an incense.
Yep. And around here, you'll get it as the pine sap, which is just, to me, is what Colorado smells like.
Yeah,
It's like to find that sap. And sometimes it, what is it? It smells like burnt butterscotch or something.
Yeah,
It's
there's like a butterscotch, vanilla.
So sap is similar and has relationship to our cerebral spinal fluid. So that's one of, I'm most interested in how to keep finding where the templates cross over. So David and I, my beloved, were talking about this morning, because I said I need to just get a little closer to the sap metaphor for why with spa wasn't going to be right, but SAP worked, and so Sacred Art Practitioner Program. So SAP actually, and I know you know more about it, in a academic way perhaps, also hands-on, but David was saying, think of it as like a conversation between the stars and the minerals. And so from the trees are drawing in all this kind of cosmic process of light and sunshine and stars through leaves, and drawing it down the trunk into the root system, where it's met in a way with the mineral kingdom that then is being drawn back up the tree. And that the intricacy of what's happening in this apparent tree energy is nothing short of an absolute miracle.
Total miracle.
The levels of the communication and sensitivity of the roots, the fact that so many of these tree systems are one organism, I think more than we know. But certainly aspens and bamboo have been understood to be one big tree system, one organism, one being. So it's like to sit with a tree and to remember what the trees remind us of, and then to begin to feel, sap rising and falling. Like even in cerebral spinal fluid, there's only 150 mils of cerebral spinal fluid, right? Like 100 mils is what you're allowed on an airplane, right? So that's 100 mils. Well, it's not that much. It's a container about this big.
Wow.
But it keeps circulating, and then it gets absorbed and it's refreshed. But if there's not a lot of volume there, and yet it's what keeps our brain moving. It's a really delicate aspect of how we function in our core.
Yeah.
So finding out what that relationship is, and then giving people an opportunity to discover it as they lean up against a tree or hug a tree or meditate on a tree, whatever their mode of communication connection will be, and to learn how does sap relate to us? What does it have to teach us? How can a tree, help us ground at the same time, open and flower or bear fruit, or be a home for eagles and songbirds. So that's why sap. Isn't that fun?
Exquisite.
Yeah, we're all really excited about it, because for David and me, it feels like it's a culmination of literally decades and decades of esoteric research and programs and offerings, and we've both written a lot, and we're at that stage of life where we really want to be contributing, and not just to a legacy, but to a way of offering, lifelong body of work.
Yes.
And we have a fabulous faculty, starting with a beautiful 30-year-old who, is kind of navigating the wild and has done a lot of Native American practice, and so 30, 40, 50, 60, and 70 years are our faculty. So we cover a big lifespan.
So that's transgenerational also.
It's transgenerational, which I feel is an important part for sure of
absolutely.
what we need to be learning from, his wildness, and and every faculty member is bringing a huge gift of their particular expertise.
Beautiful, beautiful. I am so struck by the connection with the sap, the cerebral spinal fluid, and thinking now about the trees and the plants that are literally mediating between cosmos and earth. They are connecting with that soil, with those trillions of organisms. They do have this neurological communication network that utterly dwarfs our internet. And I know David Haskell was on a recent episode, the author who writes about trees and is a biologist. And the trees are truly, truly, truly miraculous. And of course, we wouldn't be alive without them. And I remember when I was researching Why on Earth, I came across this little tidbit that blew me away, and it still does, which is that the molecule that those trees are using to transform sunlight into food and energy through photosynthesis, right? Chlorophyll. Chlorophyll, it's the exact same molecule as the hemoglobin in our blood, with an exception that at the center of the chlorophyll there's one little magnesium atom, where in the hemoglobin that's an iron atom instead. And it's, my gosh, we are so related.
From red to green too, right? I mean, and that little shift is a powerful color enhancer. I think that's that essential part of understanding that connection. And when you are filled with the awe of what a tree actually is, and then we realize, okay, well, that means we have to be as amazing as that as human beings. And it's almost like reflective knowing. The more we learn about the amazing thing a tree is, and then start to say, oh, that must mean I'm capable of a lot more awareness and function. I mean, we all know there's a lot that goes on that we're not conscious of in our amazing biology and neurology.
Sure.
No question about that. But how awake can we start to become? One of the other things that we're working with that comes out of a couple traditions, but it definitely comes out of anthroposophy. And I recently, for the first time, read it in an African book about the 12 senses. that we are more than our five senses. And people have referred to that. There's obviously more going on than just the five biggies. But Steiner has 12, so we've applied them. Not that this is true, but it gives a template. So we put a sense at each of the zodiacal posts so that we can start to use it as a way of creating pattern. So mindful patterns for living on Earth. How do we cross over our sensory doorways that we all know there's more, just even using, sound. Say we know that dogs can hear in a much greater range than we're capable of. But is that because we're not applying an ability to open that temple doorway to increase the frequencies that we can hear? That's just a simple example. And his way of, Steiner's way of putting the 12 senses becomes another way to create conversation. Like, how do we become better humans, more open, more aware of the intricacies? The same way a tree is intricately connected to everything, to the water, to the air, to the stars, to the ground, to the humans. So that's exciting. And to feel how much we can be learning from nature, and that we need to be preserving nature so we can keep learning from
Absolutely,
it.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let me just pause there and share with our audience that if you'd like to find out more about SAP, and I encourage you to check it out because it is getting started here in just a few weeks. The best place to go is to a website, sapcp.wildapricot.org. So that's sapcp.wildapricot, all one word, .org. And I want to also mention that in May 17 to 19, we are hosting a wonderful 3-day summit, massively mobilizing sustainability, deep leadership for the 21st century, right here in the Star House and on this beautiful property. Unlike a lot of other conferences you may have been to at hotel conference centers and so forth, outside of this space is a whole bunch of beautiful forested wildland that you're going to be connecting with as part of your 3-day experience. So if you want to learn more about that, just go to whyonearth.org. There's info right on the homepage, the landing page there. And I also want to mention this is the Why on Earth Community's Stewardship and Sustainability podcast series, and want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors who are supporting the upcoming summit as well as the podcast. And this includes the Association of Waldorf Schools of North America, Earth Coast Productions, Equal Exchange, fabulous farmer-owned, organic, stewardship-based coffees, teas, and chocolates, for those of you who like those sorts of things. I love them. The International Society of Sustainability Professionals, the Lidge Family Foundation, Patagonia, Purium, and Waylay Waters. So those are our sponsors. Really excited about the summit, whyonearth.org. And also want to mention, if any of you would like to check out any of our audiobook or ebook products on the Why on Earth website, just use the code Why on Earth. You'll get a discount with that. So Lila, getting back to SAP and to the nature as metaphor, nature as teacher, when we're talking about sacred arts program, I imagine there's also some human practice side to this. Is that something you could share a little more with us?
There are 3 temples that we're exploring through SAP. So one is the Temple of Nature, which is wild nature, and I think it's sort of domestic, like where you're gardening. So wild and more tame, cultivated nature. And then the Temple of Body, Soul, and Spirit. So how do we navigate as soul in such a way that we are actualizing to the highest potential the realm of spirit into matter, first with ourself. So self-realization is sort of what I would say most workshops are dedicated to self-realization. How do I wake up? Important work. And we need to move into earth realization.
Yeah.
How do we become an aware network of communities that are sharing and rising into what I think is the next level of, could be called surrendered leadership. It could be called ecstasis, where a group really starts to function with a intuitive connection, and there isn't the most relevant person takes the lead in whatever might be happening, right? So it's a different kind of an organism.
I love how Chardin, the wonderful Jesuit philosopher and writer, was anticipating this in what he was calling noosphere and omega point. And he was writing about this in the early 20th century, like 100 years ago.
Yeah, it's the next obvious place for it's like trees, right? I mean, they're sharing an ecosystem, and they're, one moves and they all kind of move. And then the third temple is basically of form and flow of the structure, and how temples have patterns and codes and keys which are universal. So it's this fabulous mix of, like I say, everything that we've, as a couple, have learned together in our 25-year journey. It definitely involves this as a temple, but all earth becomes a temple.
Yeah.
And we keep moving appropriately. So it's not all about earth stewardship, because we have to take care of ourselves.
Right.
We have to keep healthy and vibrant and alive. So it's like becoming deliberately awake to, where do I need to put my attention now? But also to make sure that as much as we can be serving what's happening at this remarkable time in the developmental cycle of Earth, in her process of being initiated, which is one of the ways I see it when I can be expanded enough. And we have to keep expanding our ability to see what's going on, because if we don't keep getting like potentially bigger and holding what's happening on the planet, we'll collapse into the despair and the grief, which is also an essential and important part of being able to realize that's there also.
Yeah.
We're if we feel it, we can experience the extinction of species, and that's a death process that we can't just not acknowledge, because it has an impact. And if it keeps happening at the rate it is, it'll have a major impact.
That's right.
And yet the further out we can expand to see what's happening as its own natural cycle, the more we will feel empowered to be able to be in connection with it, and not only at the effect of it.
Yeah.
So it's a dance, isn't it, of like the paradox of the light and the dark.
And it's so beautiful to feel the empowerment of recognizing how much this is an inside-out job and opportunity. And I'm struck that part of what we're talking about is understanding the sanctity of each of us and of all the different places and spaces on this huge, beautiful planet. And, I think it's fair to say that much of our recent history has included a whole lot of desecration, which is the opposite of understanding sanctity. It's the desanctification on some level. And, I'm struck, this word mundane is popping into my mind, that for some of us, we might think of trees as mundane, or might think of soil as mundane. And well, that's absolutely true. Mundane means of the earth. So this word mundane is actually also pointing us in the direction of the sacred, where we might have previously not realized the sacred was right there. And I wonder if that's part of the awakening that's happening right now in our culture in particular.
Oh, I mean, I love that it is. And you've referenced a few of these different projects. Bill Mollison would find that when he would teach in the United States, where people were willing to pay an enormous amount of money for his permaculture courses, he would then pad himself with wads of cash and cross into Africa and India, where he would meet with the women, mostly, or in the Middle East, and he would give away as much of his work as possible, because he knew that women would take the desertified desert areas of their homeland and they would grow stuff, you know? And they would create a shift in their locality. You know, or somebody begins a biodynamic farm in the midst of a chemical farming operation, and there's story after story of, you know, this is the farm that somehow is protected because it's in communication, you know, and locusts or whatever else might flood the neighboring areas, but something about the level of refined communication that that group of people had with the elements and the elementals themselves meant there was more intelligence. And that life supports intelligence and integration. And, you know, I have loved being in connection with elementals to my very limited experience of that, because it's so clear to me that they are there, right? That there's little gnome creatures, and, you know, we have, as I've mentioned, these 12 standing stones. So one of our practical ways, people I hope will enjoy the humor of this, that we connect with some of these stones, which have a real presence. I mean, each one is a character, and after 20 years of connecting with these 12 stones, which are all way bigger than me, I now start to feel them. Like I've had an experience of the frequency of what it is to actually feel a stone and have it translate into a vibration. And one of the ways we feed the stones is by pouring high quality beer on them, because
They like the good stuff.
they like the good stuff, because the yeast feeds the lichen. That would be one way of looking at it. And I think that stone beings like beer. You can see a little, you know, gnome, like, you know, 7 dwarfs, you know, just they're like the beer drinking type.
That is fabulous. Well, I'm so excited, Lila, to have this opportunity to talk with you today and to share this wisdom and this knowledge with our audience. I want to begin to wrap up here by inviting folks, please check out SAP at sapcp.wildapricot.org. You can find the Star House online as well. And whyonearth.org, of course, has all kinds of resources for you too. Lila, before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience before we conclude for today?
Oh gosh, I think maybe it would be earth body temple, you know, to realize that the sacredness that we are, that the altar that we are, the massive intelligence that's gone into the design of anthropos, is such a miracle. It's just, we are such a miracle. And if we can reconnect with the miracle of that, and the treasure and preciousness of being able to say, okay, in this moment, what my body needs right now is a really deep, slow breath. And that I need to light on the candle of my heart, you know, a dedication to something I care about, so that when I walk through this world, I'm not just walking for myself. Maybe I'm walking for the unrest in New Zealand right now, or holding those people who were, you know, taken out of a temple in such a dramatic way. To realize that the simplest ways can have meaning, that the privilege I have to be in this world is something I need to make a dedication and an offering to the whole. So
Wonderful, beautiful. Thank you so much, Lila.
I love you, Aaron.
Love you too.
I love this work.
Great working with you. Thank you, my friend.
The Why on Earth Community Stewardship and Sustainability podcast series is hosted by Aaron William Perry, author, thought leader, and executive consultant. The podcast and video recordings are made possible by the generous support of people like you. To sign up as a daily, weekly, or monthly supporter, please visit whyonearth.org/support. Support packages start at just $1 per month. The podcast series is also sponsored by several corporate and organization sponsors. You can get discounts on their products and services using the code WHYONEARTH, all one word with a Y. These sponsors are listed on the whyonearth.org/support page. If you found this particular podcast episode especially insightful, informative, or inspiring, please pass it on and share it with a friend whom you think will also enjoy it. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your support. And thank you for being a part of the Why on Earth community.